In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about how structural directives work in Ionic 2. So this is an Angular concept, it's nothing specific to Ionic 2. We're just going to be using an Ionic application as an example here. So a structural directive is a way to modify the DOM, that's the document object model, the structure of your web page. They allow us to modify that by removing or adding certain DOM elements. And so all structural directives, they have this weird star syntax in front of them. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But you'll see different kinds of structural directives. We have the ngIf that we're using as a first example here, ngFor, and we have this ngSwitchCase as well, all which perform slightly different things, but the end result is that we're either removing or adding some content to the DOM as a result of that directive. And so the first example we're going to look at is ngIf, and that handles either displaying a certain element or not displaying that element, but the important difference is that with ngIf, if that condition that we're looking for is not met, then the element itself is actually removed from the document. It's not just hidden. So the difference there is that we could just say hide it with CSS or something like that, and still have it be there, we just can't see it. But the difference is that by removing it completely, there's some performance benefits because Angular no longer has to perform change detection on that. It's not consuming more resources because it's just completely gone. It may not always be the best thing to do depending on what the goals of your application are, but in general, it's going to be a better idea to remove an element completely with ngIf rather than just hiding it if a certain condition is met. Okay, so the first example here, we're using the ngIf and we're linking it to this brag variable that I've got defined in home.ts here. So right now I've just got, that's a boolean, and I've got that set to false. And so the idea is that with ngIf, we're saying if this condition is met, then show this, whatever is inside of the container there. And so in this case, it's set to false, so it's not going to display anything. But I want to talk a little bit about specifically this star syntax now, and why we use that. And the short of it is that it's just to make writing these structural directives easier. So the code I have underneath this is exactly the same thing as this. This will display that h2 tag in the div if the brag variable is set to true, just in the same way as this will. So these two are exactly the same, except this one is using sort of this shortcut syntax of using the star to create this for us. And so what you can see here is that this star syntax is creating a template, and this is a HTML5 tag. And in a normal application, what happens with these template tags is by default they are hidden when they're added to the DOM. But what Angular does, it treats these as a bit of a special case where it goes and it'll just remove any templates it finds and it replaces it with its own script tag, which it's then going to use to perform whatever things it needs to do. So in the case of a ngIf, it's going to either hide or display something. In the case of an ngFor, it's going to then loop over a bunch of data and start displaying it. So we need to create these template tags, but it's a bit of work to create a template tag, assign this ngIf directive to it, and then put everything we need inside of that template. Instead, we just use this star ngIf syntax, which will just handle creating the template automatically for us. So if we take a look at what's happening in the browser now, you'll see that it's just completely blank right now because that boolean was set to false. So this condition isn't being met, so it's not being displayed. But if I go in here and I change this now to true, and we take another look, you can see that both of the h2 tags are being rendered out now. So as I mentioned, these two do exactly the same thing. When that brag variable is set to true, it's going to render out I'm awesome, and that's why we see both of those being output to the screen right now. Okay, so now let's move on to the ngFor directive. And this is, again, it's a similar approach where we're creating these template tags by using this special star syntax, but instead of just hiding or showing an element based on some condition, for this one we are able to loop over an array of data. So in here I've just got an array defined with 3 names in there. We have Jennifer, Waleed, and Michael. And what this allows us to do is loop over those and inject each of them as their own element into the DOM. So this is going to inject the H2 for each of the names we have, and then it's going to use this interpolation here to add that specific name to the H2 tag. So if I were to save this now, we should see the 3 names rendered out here. And so you can see all those there. And then as a final example, we have this ngSwitch, which just checks a certain variable and then it tests it for different values. So what I have set up now is I'm looking at this who is awesome variable, and right now I've got it set to Jennifer. And so again, it's going to create these template tags for us automatically. We don't have to worry about that. We just have to use this star syntax. And so what's going to happen is it's going to test for each of these values. So it's saying in the case that the value equals Jennifer, and also make a note that we've added these quotations here because this is a string value we're testing for. It's going to test if the value equals Jennifer, and if it does, it'll render out that Jennifer is awesome H2 tag, and it's going to get rid of these other 2. And the same for Waleed and Michael, whichever one matches, it will display that one and hide the rest. So if I save that now, because it is set to Jennifer, that's what we should see in the app here, and we do. So that was just a really quick example of how to use structural directives in Ionic 2 and in Angular applications. I mainly wanted to just go over that concept of templates and what this star syntax is doing. Of course, there is some much more complicated things you can do with structural directives, but hopefully that gives you the basic idea of what's going on behind the scenes rather than just wondering why we put this random star in front of things. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.